Caught my dad cheating while my mom was recovering from a stroke. He left us when I confronted him, and now my parents are getting divorced while he blames me for ruining his life. I, 17F, have always been close to my mom while growing up. It wasn't that difficult because my mother is literally the kindest person I know. As far back as I can remember, my mother has literally treated me like her best friend. She has always been a girl's girl, so I could share anything with her without the fear of getting judged or reprimanded. We would go shopping together, watch movies together, and get our hair done. However, despite her friendly and gentle nature, she didn't let me get away with everything. I still had a curfew, and I knew my limits and respected them. My dad, on the other hand, was completely the opposite. I have always felt like he never wanted to be a father in the first place because he never really spent any time with me, even though he was a stay-at-home parent. Apart from dropping me off and picking me up from school, he spent most of his time playing video games inside his room. There were many occasions when my mom would come back home from a day's work to find my dad still playing games without bothering to cook dinner or finish any chores around the house. This would ultimately lead to fighting, with my dad storming out of the house in a fit of rage. It was only when I started to grow older did I realize just how toxic this behavior of his was. My mom would beg him all the time to find a job or help her with chores around the house, but he would make excuses the whole day, saying he was playing video games for research purposes so he could be better at his job when he eventually found one. My dad had a computer science degree, and according to my mom, he initially had a good job during the start of their relationship, but when she got pregnant with me, he had been laid off due to his company downsizing. This is why he had encouraged my mom to get an abortion instead of going through with her pregnancy with me, but my mom had refused. They had come to an agreement that while mom would work to support the three of us, he would take some time off to take care of me and do the chores around the house just like any stay-at-home parent does. This agreement was always just temporary, and he was supposed to go back to work. However, he never did. When I was 6 years old, I remember even some of my friends teasing me about the fact that my dad was jobless and how their parents would always make fun of my family behind our backs. It's not just the fact that my dad didn't do anything, but it was also the fact that he started to gain weight and refused to take care of himself. He would always ask one of the neighborhood mothers to drop me off at school because he was too lazy to even wake up early. He would sometimes forget to pick me up from school, and luckily, one of my classmates' parents would drop me off. I would come inside the house to find my dad still playing video games or taking a nap without a single care in the world. I was clearly being neglected, and I guess my mother could see that, so she packed our bags and decided to leave him. I remember that we had moved into my mom's parents' place for a short while. I remember my dad coming to visit us and trying to convince my mother to not go through with the divorce. Even my mom's parents supported her decision and would warn my dad that he needed to step up, otherwise this was it. Luckily, my dad could see the error in his ways, and he decided to turn his life over. He started to wake up and go for a run every day in the morning. He would pick me up and drop me off back at my grandparents' place. On the way, he would have conversations with me which made me start to open up to him. On the weekends, he took me to the park where he would teach me to play badminton. For the first time, I started to have a bit of fun while spending time with my dad. I think my mom must have also seen this positive change in him, and after a lot of back and forth conversations, she decided to move back in with him. Eventually, my dad started to lose weight due to his healthy lifestyle, and he also found a job. This job paid him significantly lower than mom's, but it was still a good start for him. You would think this was the end of our troubles, but it was actually the start. You see, my dad started to come home late and would be constantly on his phone. If I ever wanted to have a conversation with him, he would ignore me like I didn't exist. He no longer did anything to spend time with me, and he was back to being his old, emotionally unavailable self. My mom started to grow more and more suspicious of my dad's behavior. She would try to have a conversation with him, but he would brush off her concerns, saying that she was overreacting. But I guess a woman's intuition is never wrong, because my mother eventually found inappropriate texts on his cell phone with his personal trainer. My mom absolutely lost her shit and they had a huge fight. My dad was furious at her that she had checked his phone behind his back and kept calling her a backstabber. I think this was the first time that I saw both my parents screaming at each other at the top of their voices, which absolutely terrified me. Their fight turned physical, and accidentally, one of my dad's punches landed on my mom's face, which resulted in a nosebleed. Seeing my mom in pain made me start to cry, as I had never seen so much blood, and I was scared that my mom might die. As my dad drove us to the hospital, he kept telling me that I was not allowed to tell the truth to anyone, and that if the doctors or nurses asked me, I was simply to say that mom hit her face on the door. He warned me that if I told anybody the truth, then he would be taken away from us and it would be all my fault. As a child, I didn't want to be responsible for my dad being taken away, so I kept my mouth shut. When my mom recovered, my dad promised her that he would block all communication with his personal trainer, and he was going to change his way. Hence, my mom never filed a case against him either, and they went back to living their life after she got well, as if nothing had ever happened. When I was 11, my mom would take me to visit her college best friend, Marie, and her husband, Larry, every summer. We would spend a week or two at their cabin, and I always had a lot of fun with Marie's nephews and nieces, who would also come to visit. Dad normally would always stay behind, but this one year he agreed to come with us. The first few days went without any incident, but one particularly sunny afternoon, I could not take a nap or sit still and read a book, so I decided to go out and take a walk in the woods nearby. I wish I would not have done that because I found my dad making out with Marie. They were not even hiding it, and if my mom or Marie's husband would have walked into the woods at that time, they could have easily spotted them. I was so scared after what I saw that I ran back as quietly as I could. I felt like puking as I realized exactly what I had witnessed. I was afraid about what to do as I didn't want my dad to get angry at me, but at the same time, I didn't want to betray my mom. Luckily, I didn't have to suffer in silence for long because Marie's husband, Larry, eventually caught my dad kissing Marie out on the lake. He flew into a rage and gave my dad a few good punches, resulting in a black eye. Later, when my mom found out, she was so furious that she immediately attacked both of them until Larry had to literally hold her down. Mom was particularly disappointed with my dad because she had always thought of Marie as her sister and never imagined they could do something like this. Marie and my dad tried their best to put up a show and apologize. My dad even tried to throw Marie under the bus by blaming everything on her. He told us that Marie had made the first move and that he just got carried away without thinking. They insisted wholeheartedly that it was just a one-time thing, but I was the only one who knew that they were lying. I had seen them kissing before and I could expose them if I wanted to, but I was too afraid to speak up. I didn't even know if it was the right thing for me to do at that age. Those two scumbags managed to convince Mom and Larry that this would never happen again and that maybe they were just drunk. However, my mom didn't waste any more time and announced that we would be leaving. No matter how much Marie apologized, my mom was done with her, and that was the last I ever remember seeing her. To be honest, it's really sad to write about everything that my mom went through with my dad, and I have absolutely no idea why she stayed with him after each indiscretion. I wish she would have left him back then, as it would have not really hampered our life in any way. When I was 16 years old, my mother suffered a serious stroke while she was driving. Luckily, although she survived the fatal accident, she was never really the same. Overnight, our lives changed completely as my mother became bedridden, needing to recover from a spinal injury she sustained in the accident. She couldn't get up on her own or walk properly, and any small movement caused her extreme pain and discomfort. My grandparents took turns coming over and staying with us for those few months to help take care of my mom. I am glad they did because my dad had to work the whole day and didn't want to hire a full-time nurse. I tried to help my mom as much as I could at that age. Every day, I would come home from school and sit with her for hours, talking to her while she drifted in and out due to her strong medications. I would help change her diapers and would rub her feet. Just after 2 months, my dad started to complain about how expensive everything was around the house now that mom wasn't working and how mom's insurance was not covering her bills enough. This really pissed me off as I had watched my mom do so much around the house, and the one time when she needed us, he was trying to complain. My grandparents offered to help my dad with a few $1,000s from their retirement fund. In fact, my grandmother even gave my dad some of her jewelry so he could pawn them and use the money to take care of my mom. However, as the months went by, my dad continued to complain and take money from my grandparents whenever he could, all in the name of taking care of my mom or paying the rent and other bills. I knew the kind of person my dad was, hence I started to grow suspicious of him. This is how I noticed that he was chatting a lot with someone on his phone just like he used to do before. It was very easy for me to come up with a plan to check his messages through his MacBook to find out what was happening with him. This is how I discovered that he was in constant touch with a woman named Angie. Obviously, I didn't go through the messages as that would have been highly inappropriate, but from their last few messages, it was clear that my dad was cheating on my mom yet again. This time around the stake was much higher. I could not imagine the heartbreak my mom would feel if she found out about this with the state of mind she already had. I was so angry that I knew I had to take action. I tried to get my dad's phone to delete all their messages and block this woman from his contacts, hoping that Angie would never contact him again. Being a naive teenager, I thought this would somehow stop my dad from cheating. But, of course, I got caught when my dad must have seen that Angie was blocked out of nowhere. He knew there was no one else who could have done that on his phone except me. He confronted me, yelling about how I dared to touch his phone. I tried to hold back, but I could not help and yelled back at him that I was done watching him cheat on my mom all the time. His face turned red with embarrassment. He tried to act all innocent, telling me that I wasn't old enough to understand what was going on and asking me to mind my own business. This infuriated me further, hence not only did I tell him that I knew he was cheating on mom again with Angie, but that I had seen him kissing Marie all those years ago. I told him that I had known since then what a piece of shit he was. My grandmother walked into the living room, looking concerned, to check on us after hearing our heated argument. She took one look at the tension between us and immediately knew something serious was going on. He started to splutter as he explained how this was none of my business and that I was too young to talk to him this way. He tried to gaslight me, insisting that as a parent he deserved respect from me, but I wasn't having it anymore. I had held back my tongue for a long time out of fear, but watching my mom get sick had terrified me and made me protective. I knew I wasn't going to let him hurt her ever again. I pointed out to him how all my classmates had happy families, and none of their dads had ever cheated on their wives. I was so upset at him that I told him I was ashamed to have a dad like him and that I wished he was never my father. I mean, I probably didn't even mean it at that time, but I guess this struck a chord with my dad. He asked me if what I was saying was true and I nodded. I told him that I was sick of him behaving this way and that my mom deserved much better than him. My outburst really shook my dad because the very next moment he declared to me angrily that he was done with us. I watched him pack his bags while I stood there feeling both angry and confused about what was happening. My grandmother kept asking him what he was doing, and my dad told her that this is why he never wanted me as kids to ruin everything. He went on to announce that he had tried his best to be there for my mom since it was a tough time for her, but after seeing me talk this way, he was done with us. He informed us that he didn't want to spend the rest of his life in an unhappy relationship with my mom, so he decided that he would be moving out. He claimed that his girlfriend, Angie, loved him very much and he didn't deserve to take any shit from us. My grandmother yelled at him for being pathetic and a deadbeat father, but it didn't bother my dad much as he had already made up his mind. The last image I remember of my dad was watching him walk out of the house with his bags and never even turn around to bid goodbye to us. Everything happened so fast that I did not even have time to react to the situation. I knew I had spoken my truth, but watching my dad walk out on us was still hard on me. Honestly, I had never imagined that he would actually leave. I burst out crying and blamed myself for making him move out. However, my grandmother assured me that it wasn't my fault. She said my dad was just a loser who had been looking for reasons for a long time to leave us and that this had nothing to do with him. I found this hard to believe because it was me who had shouted at him. I was so upset that I had not even realized that I would have to break the news to my poor mom. I started to cry even more as I didn't want to break her heart and hamper her recovery in any way. We waited for my granddad to arrive so we could together talk with my mom and gently break the news to her. Surprisingly, my mother took the news a lot better than I expected. She looked shocked and tried to call my dad several times, but he never answered. After a few minutes of processing her emotions, I guess she must have seen the fear in my eyes because she then asked me to come closer so she could hug me. She reassured me that I had nothing to worry about and that she had always known he was a coward. I broke down on her arms and apologized to her for everything, but she told me that she had no idea how much pain I had held back all these years just to protect their feelings. She promised that we would be fine without him. I was a bit relieved that she wasn't blaming me like I thought she would, because I clearly blamed myself and felt extremely guilty for what had happened. Over the next few months, my mother focused on recovering while my grandparents moved in with us to take care of my mom full time. They were an immense help and I could go to school every day knowing that my mom was being well taken care of. I decided to get a part-time job by tutoring a few students, which helped me bring in some money. It wasn't a lot, but I wanted to help my grandparents as much as I could while my mom recovered. Throughout all this, my dad never called us even though I tried to get in touch with him several times and sent a few texts apologizing to him. It felt so surreal and painful that my own dad didn't even care enough to check on us. When my mom finally recovered and was able to walk and move around just like her old self, it felt like a miracle. Our doctors informed us that she was completely okay, and I still am so grateful to God that my mom is back to normal. The last months have been draining mentally and physically, to say the least. After my mom recovered, the first thing she did was find a divorce lawyer to start the process of divorcing my dad. Now, if you're wondering why my dad hadn't filed for divorce yet despite moving out, it was clear that he didn't want to pay any child support or health insurance. He knew my mom wasn't well, so he was delaying it as long as possible. My mom, however, was finally done with him. When she got the papers, she tried to get in touch with him so she could mail them to him. This is when my dad, after months and months of no contact, reached out to my mom yesterday and asked her if she was serious about divorcing him after reading all her text messages. My mother informed him that this was indeed very serious and she was getting a divorce from him one way or the other. As you can guess, my dad, being a lowlife, started begging my mom during their phone call to not divorce him. He told her that his girlfriend had broken up with him just a few weeks after he left us. He claimed that he had been living alone in a motel, trying to save face in front of us since he was too scared to return. He went on to tell my mom that he always imagined that after she recovered, she would contact him and they could have an honest conversation with each other. He went on to say that he never imagined that she would actually go ahead and file for divorce. He begged her to think this through with a cool mind, but my mom firmly told him that if he did not sign the papers, then she would take him straight to court. He kept arguing and I don't know if he ended up agreeing or not. However, since then, my dad has sent me several messages and voicemails blaming me for everything. I have listened to 2 of his voicemails where he is clearly yelling at me that I ruined his life and that I am to be blamed for his divorce. He goes on to say how he wishes I was never even born. I have shown all these things to my mom, who is furious and has told me that he is just a manipulator who refuses to accept his own mistakes. However, I can't help but feel a bit guilty since I somewhat agree with him. I wanted to write my story on Reddit today to ask if anyone here blames me as well, just like my dad does for their divorce. Ida, for not controlling my anger that day which made my dad walk out on us? Has anybody else gone through this? My mom loves me a lot, so she might be trying to not blame me in order to protect me from the truth. I don't want to be the reason for her unhappiness, so please be honest in the comments. Update 1. I have been crying while reading all your comments. I cannot imagine that there are so many strangers out there who have been hurt just like I have, and for the first time, I don't feel alone. It's so strange to read everyone's story about their own dysfunctional family because I always thought everybody else's life was perfect. I guess everyone has their own story. Also, some of you have actually blamed me for my parents' divorce, and even though thinking about it still makes me feel guilty, after reading so many stories, I agree that it was better for me to speak my mind to my dad rather than keep it all in and pretend that he was a good person. I never forced my dad to cheat, and I never asked him to leave us, so that decision is completely on him. Also, just to clarify, just in case it wasn't clear earlier, I am glad that my parents are divorcing. I want my mother to be happy, and I think this time she has really made up her mind. For those who are asking, if the house belongs to my mom, it doesn't. We live here on rent, and after all the expenses for her treatment, she doesn't have any assets left. So, she won't lose anything in the divorce with my dad. Update 2. It's been a month since I last updated, and a lot has happened since then. First of all, my dad showed up at our doorsteps after so many months to apologize to my mom. He looked like he had a rough couple of months and had even grown a thick beard. At first, my grandparents refused to let him in, but my dad kept apologizing, telling them how he just wanted one last conversation with mom. My mom let him in, and he started to apologize to her for everything. He broke down as he explained to her how he had time to think these last few months and had realized how my mom was the perfect woman for him and someone he should have learned to cherish a long time ago. He told her how Angie was not even half of the woman she is, and he discovered this only when he moved in with her. He had met her online and had thought that he would have his fairy tale relationship, but it was quite the opposite. They fought a lot, and eventually Angie kicked him out in the middle of the night, leaving him homeless. He knew he could not return back home, so he started to live out of a motel. He would often spend his evenings drinking alone, which would then make him late for work the next day. He explained how he could not keep up with his job and had been laid off a few weeks ago. My dad broke down as he begged my mom that he was done with his ways and that he was going to change. I know this all sounds emotional, but knowing how shitty my dad is, I could not help but burst out laughing. Even his tears looked fake and forced. My mother was also not having it, and she smiled and asked him to stop putting on a show. She shoved the divorce papers in his face and told him that he needed to sign them right then and there so she could file them. My dad began to refuse, but my grandparents made it clear that they would investigate his finances and take legal action against him for taking thousands of dollars from them, as well as their jewelry. They were adamant that he couldn't have spent all that money on us and that he must have spent some on his girlfriend. My mom assured him that the more he dragged the case, the more lawyers' fees he would have to pay, since we had more than enough proof of his abuse towards us. My dad had the audacity to turn to me and ask if I was happy with what I had done. He shook his head in disgust, suggesting I should have kept my mouth shut that day. Hearing this, I started to laugh at this absurdness, while my mom yelled at him for being an entitled jerk trying to manipulate his way out of the mess he created. I pointed out to him that he had cheated on his wife multiple times, yet now he was trying to blame me for his actions. My laughter seemed to irk him even more, and he glared at me, muttering curses under his breath. My grandfather forcefully handed him a pen and asked him to sign the papers and leave our house. It was refreshing to see my entire family stand up against my dad. In the end, he had no choice but to sign. My mother promised me that this would be the last time I ever saw my dad, as she did not want him to come near me and further traumatize me. Update 3. Hey guys. It's been a few months since I updated anything here. My parents have finally gotten a divorce. Although it wasn't smooth, I'm just glad that my mom and I are free of him. My dad has been ordered by the court to pay for my college expenses until I graduate, which I think is a good lesson for him since he has hardly ever done anything for me. My mom is much healthier now and has started to regularly exercise to keep a check on her health. To everyone asking why my dad kept blaming me, I have to say that my dad clearly knew how good he had it with my mom and was afraid of losing a dependable partner like her. Instead of being an adult about it, he decided to blame me for absolutely no reason. I see that more clearly now, and I'm even more glad that I spoke my mind to him all those months ago. My grandparents have finally moved back into their place after months of living with us to take care of mom. We visit them every weekend as I have grown every attached to them. Mom has started looking for a new job while I'm still tutoring. We may not have a lot right now, but we both agree that we feel much freer than before. I listened to some of your advice and have made up my mind to go for therapy when I go away to college. I have also started journaling, which is surprisingly helpful. Thank you to everyone who has stuck by me these last couple of months and offered their support and encouragement. Your kindness and understanding have helped me go through this difficult period, and I am truly grateful. I won't be deleting my post as I had thought to do earlier, because if there's anyone else out there going through what my mom and I experienced, I want them to find this post. I hope it brings them comfort to know that things eventually get better with time.